All right, today we are trying to untangle a really confusing, really high stakes situation that's been developing between the US and Iran. I mean, in just a few hours, things went from tense to, well, something else entirely. And that's the big question, isn't it? Let's dive in.
So it all kicked off with this. Suddenly, reports start flying that Iran has shut down its airspace. No explanation, no warning, just closed. A move like that is a giant, flashing red light. It immediately puts everyone in the region, and frankly, the world, on edge. And then, at pretty much the same time, we get this really cryptic statement from then President Trump. He says the killing in Iran is stopping, but then immediately follows it up with, "If it happens, I'll be very upset." Wait, what? It is stopping or it might happen? You can see how a quote like that just poured gasoline on an already confusing fire. Which, yeah, brings us to the question that was on everybody's mind and the one that our source material asks directly. What the heck is going on here? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to unpack the events, the strategy, and the really deep history behind this whole standoff. To even begin to make sense of this, we have to rewind and look at one incredibly chaotic 3-hour window where it felt like anything could happen. Let's break down that timeline. I mean, just look at how fast this all went down. First, you get whispers and reports of potential US military strikes. Then, bam, the president's bizarre comments hit the news. Almost at the same moment, Iran closes its airspace. And right on the heels of that, we start hearing that US personnel are being moved out of bases in the region. It's just this dizzying sequence of events that seem to contradict each other. Okay, so what was that presidential statement about? Well, according to Senator Tom Cotton, it had nothing to do with a U.S. strike. He suggested the comment was actually a warning to the Iranian government about its own violent crackdown on protesters inside Iran. So the killing he was talking about was internal, not an impending external attack. You know, this interpretation doesn't just explain one weird quote. It actually plugs into a much broader strategic idea that Senator Cotton says explains the administration's entire approach, a doctrine he calls the Trump way of war. So what is it? Well, the source defines it as a strategy that's all about direct, bold, and audacious strikes to get something very specific done. And here's the most crucial part. The goal is to do this while avoiding these massive open-ended troop commitments. The whole idea is to make a clean break from the past to achieve a security goal with one big move instead of getting bogged down for years. And this really lays out the difference, right? On one side, you have this idea of quick, targeted strikes for limited missions. And on the other, you have what everyone remembers from conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan, tens of thousands of troops, and missions that just seem to go on and on forever. The whole point of this new approach is to look absolutely nothing like that. So what does this look like in the real world? Well, Senator Cotton actually gave a few examples to make it concrete. Things like the targeted operations that took out leaders of ISIS, or strikes against strategic targets like Iran's nuclear facilities, or even the pressure campaigns against regimes like Maduro's in Venezuela. Each one is held up as an example of a bold but contained action. Okay, but all this talk about high-level foreign policy strategy, it doesn't happen in a bubble, right? Back in the US, our source material makes it really clear that all these moves were kicking up some very real and very loud anxiety. And you can hear that anxiety loud and clear in this quote from host Laura Ingraham. She's basically asking, how does any of this help the average American who's just trying to pay their bills? And she points out that these aren't just critics of the administration asking this. Even some of the president's most diehard supporters were worried about getting dragged into another war. And that right there, that's the core tension, isn't it? On one side, you have the public super wary of getting into another foreign conflict and more focused on what's happening at home. And on the other side, you have the official line that these bold actions are absolutely essential for national security. It's a classic debate, but with unbelievably high stakes. So you might be asking, with all that anxiety back home, what's the justification for such a hardline stance? Well, Senator Cotton says to understand that, you have to zoom way, way out. He argues this isn't about something that happened in the last 3 hours, but about a conflict that's been going on for 47 years. 47 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. According to this argument, that number is everything. It's meant to frame the current crisis not as something new, but as just the latest chapter in a long, long story of hostility from the Iranian regime, both toward its own people and toward the US. And this isn't just a random number. It's backed up by a whole list of specific grievances. The source cites accusations that for decades Iran has been spreading terror, that it has the blood of hundreds of Americans on its hands, that it's a constant source of chaos in the Middle East, and that it's exporting its revolutionary violence every single day.
So what's the end game here? Where does all this lead? Well, from this point of view, there are really only two ways this can end. Either the regime in Iran has a fundamental change in its behavior, or the people of Iran rise up and take their future into their own hands. Lasting peace, in this view, is only possible down one of those two roads. And finally, to wrap it all up, the source leaves us with one last, really big question to chew on, something that zooms the lens out even further, beyond the immediate crisis with Iran. Could there be an even bigger strategic goal at play here? Could all this pressure actually be a calculated move designed to weaken the growing alliance between Iran and China? It's a question that reframes this whole thing from a regional conflict to a major move on the global chessboard.